Just 2 weeks remain until voting officially kickstarts for the SRC elections for 2026, and we thought, well, how better to know your candidates than through a debate between each candidate for each portfolio. Next to me are all your candidates that are all vying for your vote for this year's SRC elections. Hello, I'm your host, Trofatso Makola, and welcome to the SRC election debate for the Portfolio Study Finance, powered by the Elections Management Consulting Agency of Africa, alongside UP's Department of Student Affairs. A reminder to check out all the other debates that are already uploaded on the YouTube channel of the Department of Student Affairs, and keep your eyes peeled for the manifesto presentations that are set to take place during the week of the 11th and the 14th of August, and that is set to take place on campus at the Law Building. Allow me to introduce our candidates for this debate. Further is from myself, we have Luwatle. Next to Luwatle, we have Kamogelo, and next to Kamogelo, we have Kaylee. Next to Kaylee, we have Princess. Thank you all for joining us for this debate. I think I'm going to start with you, Kamogelo. Please explain to us rather how delays and administrative concerns that are already existing in status quo that are already experienced by missing middle students through financial education, funding advocacy, and partnerships. How are you going to ensure that you do this if you're the officer for student finance within the SRC?
Okay. To support students affected by NSFAS, did you mean NSFAS delays?
I mean, some of them include NSFAS delays, but also there are delays that already exist within, student financing, like bursaries, for example.
Okay. Can you please repeat the question?
So as an officer, or rather as the SRC representative for student finance, how would you address the challenges that are experienced by the missing middle?
Okay, so the missing middle student often fall between NSFAS and full self-funding. So I would address this through a three-pronged approach. Firstly, financial education workshops and resources on budgeting, bursary application, and responsible borrowing to help students manage costs. Secondly, funding advocacy to push the university and external stakeholders to create bursaries, flexible payment plans, and reduce deposit requirements specifically for this group. Thirdly, partnership with alumni, private companies, and NGOs to develop work-study opportunities, internship, and with stipends and targeted scholarship, all aligned with university policy to manage higher education and more accessible and sustainable for missing middle students.
I'd like you to shift the mic to Luwatle. Same question posed to you. We know some of the issues that already are affecting students that are part of the missing middle regarding financing. How would you plan to address this if you had to be elected as a study finance representative within the SRC?
Right, so thank you very much for the question. I think what we need to understand, or what's important to understand, is that the middle class the missing middle students is students that either don't qualify for NSFAS but also don't have enough money to pay for their own university fees. So that part that is missing is very important, right? And I think when I come into office as a study finance officer, what we're looking to do is to identify how many students are in this middle missing students database, right? We need to create a database where we need to figure out how many students are affected and also how can they then access funding. But also with funding, we need to be critical of the criteria. We need to understand the criteria. We should not just get funding that's coming from the university, but then we don't know how to apply for it, one. But also number two, what is required from us? And also how much is being sent and how many students can then be helped with regards to this funding. So I think that could be a very important way in moving forward with regards to that question.
I'd like you to pass the mic to Kaylee. Kaylee, you've heard some of your fellow candidates raising a couple of solutions in terms of addressing, the funding gap that exists when it comes to the missing middle. What are some of the, solutions that you have on your end that you plan to implement if you were elected into this portfolio?
Yes, so I think regarding funding, I think personally I would look at it from two different angles. I would look at the short term and the long term. I think in the short term, definitely I would advocate for students where those gap exists, where there's administrative delays. Raise it through the right channels in the institution and get the information to the students that they require in that short term. But I think in the long term, we also need to look at alternative funding, especially with the recent news about NSFAS. I think it would benefit students to, as the study finance portfolio, what I would do in the SRC is also direct them to alternative funding. And what UP has already done successfully is set up financial aid. We already have that existing structure within the institution. So I would not only point them in that direction, but also I would work with them in tandem to see how else can we expand this institution, where else can students go to find alternative funding and to fix these delays.
And finally, I'd like you to pass the mic to Princess. Princess, you've heard some of the solutions raised. If you had to be elected into this portfolio, how do you plan to address some of the concerns raised specifically for students within the missing middle?
Thank you for the question. I suggest that a solution to the missing middle student is that the university should at least provide loans for them so that they can pay back the money later. Either NSFAS is not the only bursary that is around. There are many other bursaries, including setup bursary, that students can apply for it so that they can get the funding. So also, I think we can work as a study finance. I can work with the treasurer to raise funds also to help the students with that. There are also bursaries from companies, and also I think the alumni should give back to the university. They can also help with that, raising funds.
Yeah, you know, you've mentioned working with different stakeholders in terms of raising funds. I'd like you to shift the mic to Kaylee, of which, Kaylee, I'd like to ask you, you know, sure, there's different stakeholders of which you as study finance will be working with should you be elected into this portfolio. But I want us to shift focus in terms of within the SRC itself. Study finance as well as treasury work quite closely together. Be that as it may, how will you ensure, if elected into this portfolio, that you work efficiently in terms of addressing financial constraints or concerns for students, but also ensuring that there's efficient communication that happens between both these portfolios?
I think the key there is just transparency and clear communication. I mean, those portfolios, oftentimes students actually think they're the same thing. So I think that should give an indication of how closely these two portfolios should be working and the effort both sides should be putting into clear communication. That can look like weekly reports, weekly communication, and including I think it's the quarterly reports that the SRC announces to the students. What we do in work there will also go into those reports, and that will be transparent to the students. So I think how we work with the two portfolios will be very close, I think.
I'm seeing quite a bit of nods from Lawate. Maybe you have a bit of a response to what Kaylee has just said?
I definitely agree with what my colleagues just said now. I think most times people perceive study finance and treasury as the same position because they don't have as much information, or at least there's not as much transparency as to what's going on. But also like to go back to my other colleague about what she said about having loans that we can pay later. I think UP does have loans that they give, right? But then the problem is not many students know about these loans. And even if they do know about these loans, usually they take time to respond to students. I speak from a personal experience where NSFAS defunded me, so I'm not funded by NSFAS or by bursary at this point. And currently, it's difficult to navigate all these things on campus when you don't have funding. I've already applied for student loans. I've already applied for everything, even bursaries outside, but I haven't yet received a reply. So these things are available for us on campus. It's just difficult when you don't know which offices to knock, which people to talk to. That transparency should be important. And I think working with the incoming SRC treasurer, Clayton, it'll be very important in us at least establishing something that will be able to give the students more information on how to go about understanding and also apply for these loans and bursaries and whatever. But also going into office as a study finance officer, right? I just don't want us to have a document that we just release to the students about what the money is doing. I think what they need to understand is how this money works. Where is it coming from? What is it doing for me? What is it doing for other students? Instead of us just just giving out information and them not understanding what we were really talking to them about. So.
I'd like you to shift the mic to Kamo. You've heard what your fellow candidates have raised in terms of some of the practical solutions that are needed in order for students to know the difference between what study finance does as well as what treasurer does. How do you plan to kind of bridge that gap of understanding, specifically among students, but also knowing or showcasing students what it is that you have to offer specifically within this SRC?
Okay, so what I would offer the students is I would create workshops where I educate them about the difference between study finance and treasury, and just helping them to understand the difference and learn more about it. And also I would create pamphlets where I distribute to students about the information that they need to know about study finance and treasury. Yeah.
I'd like you to pass the mic to Princess. Princess, we know that there's a whole range of challenges that are already affecting students all across the country. What practical measures would you, as a study finance officer, advocate for to support affected students that are, affected by a whole range of issues? We've mentioned NSFAS as one of the examples, or bursaries being withdrawn as another example. How would you plan to support those affected students while also pursuing long-term solutions with relevant stakeholders?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think students can be given small interest-free loans. As a person, as a student who comes from a poor background, I know how difficult it is to come to Hatfield in February and you don't know what you're gonna eat. Also, your parents didn't give you anything. So I feel like UP could just use the money that they have to borrow students, and then students can pay it back later. Or rather, since we've encountered a situation this year as a resident who lives at next gen, our accommodation was not accredited, so we stayed like 4 to 5 months without receiving our allowance, and it was bad. The situation was very bad. So I feel like the university can use its own money to allocate funds to students, and then when NSFAS pays the money, and then they can use that money to replace their own funds. Because we were in a situation where when we were asking about the situation of accreditation, we were told that NSFAS is the one that is doing accreditation. And when we go to UP is saying NSFAS is doing accreditation. When you call NSFAS is saying that UP is. So it was like a back and forth situation. So yeah, I think interest-free loans can work in solving those situations, because it's very tough for a student to come all the way from a KZN only to arrive here, and they do not have money to buy toiletries. First of all, you cannot go to lectures hall without taking a bath, right? And some of us primary and only depend on NSFAS. We don't have any other source of income. So yeah, the university, I think, should make sure that at least each and every student gets their money in the first week of February, at least. That's the least they can.
Princess, I'd like you to pass the mic to Kaylee. Kaylee, you've heard what Princess has had to say in terms of some of the issues that students are already experiencing, and some of the practical solutions that she's since proposed. If you had to be elected within this portfolio, what other practical solutions would you propose in order to support students while pursuing long-term solutions to some of the issues that they experience?
Well, I think alternative funding, would be my biggest campaign that I would be running on with this SRC candidacy. Where can we find alternative funding? How can we direct students and get the right information to them? Because I think what a lot of students struggle with, and this was also one of the problems I encountered, is there's so many opportunities out there, but these students don't know where to find them. And like my colleague said earlier, we don't know which doors to knock on. And the opportunities are there. I mean, we come from one of the top universities in Africa. We are eligible for these opportunities, but we just don't know where to knock. We don't know where to go for these things. And coming from the university that we do, we are definitely eligible. So what I would want to do in bridging that gap is making information more streamlined, possibly even making a working directory where students can find all of this information with alternative funding, internship programs, things like that, where there's a central location like this. I know the career services is already doing a good job with this, but I would like to streamline that information to students where they can just come to a central location and find where all of these things are, because a lot of these people don't know where to go to find this information.
I'd like to shift the mic to Kamokhelo. Kamokhelo, you've heard some of the solutions raised by both your fellow candidates that are, somewhat practical for students, or rather to be implemented for students. If you had to be elected within this portfolio, what are some of the solutions that you would bring forth?
So first thing first, I would bring emergency support system that include food vouchers, provisional registration, and temporary accommodation guarantees so that no student is deregistered or evicted while waiting for funding. I'd also push for dedicated NSFAS help desk on campus with trained volunteers to track cases, escalate unresolved issues, and keep students informed. For long-term solutions, I would engage NSFAS, the Department of Higher Education, and the university management to streamline verification processes, secure earlier disbursement dates, and establish clear communication agreements so students receive consistently and timely updates.
I'd like you to shift the mic over to Luwadle. Luwadle, you've heard some of the solutions that have been proposed. If you had to be elected into this portfolio, what practical solutions would you bring forth that will allow for students to actively be supported while you look for more long-term solutions?
All right. So I think I'll go back to what my colleague said earlier on, and just touch on that and just add on it. I think the first thing we need to understand also is that when NSFAS or the administration process is taking its own time, all these other things don't wait for you. You still need to get food. You still need to pay rent. You still need to cover everything that's needed from you. And as such, I think my approach will also be in two parts. Right, it will be for short term and a long term solution. In the short term, I would want Study Finance to have a proper funding help desk, right, and a case tracking system where students can report their funding problems, understand where their cases, and receive feedback, right. I will also push for the use of the resources that already exist on campus, and that means looking at the study aid, the emergency assistance fund, the food support, the payment plans, and registration interventions, right, because I think another reason is these things, like I said, are available for us. We just don't know which doors to knock on, and the questions we should be asking, we don't really know which questions to ask and who to ask these questions. Like, what resources are available? Where are they going? Who benefits from these resources? And who are they actually addressing the problems of the students at large? You look at accommodation. Accommodation is a very big problem that we are facing, where students won't have to pay for top-up in some instances. You have to pay for all these reasons and so many things to cover, And with so limited funding, it's very difficult to then move and become a proper student here on campus. So I think that is what I would advocate for. At least having a resource that we know what the resources are used for, where they're coming from, who do they benefit, and how can we then benefit as the students.
I'd like you to keep the mic. You've mentioned something very crucial, and I think it's all alluding to the matter of transparency, right? Yes. Looking at this issue of transparency, if you had to be elected into this portfolio, how would you promote transparency as well as meaningful student consultation when it comes to student issues like accommodation, like all of you have mentioned, as well as accommodation costs, tuition, student debt, and even financial exclusion?
Okay, so I think going back to transparency, this also touch back on what I said earlier on. For transparency, we cannot simply just publish a document to the SRC and then we believe that the students should then understand what we're saying to them. These students should be able to understand what these documents actually mean, and that means we need to engage with them at the level, where they're able to understand what these documents mean, where the funding is going, and what we're actually doing as the SRC, at least in my position as Study Finance Officer. With regards to information, right, I would want Study Finance to make financial information more accessible to the students. They should understand what they're paying for, what financial support exists, what the criteria are. Like I said, we have these bursaries on campus, but then we don't know what criteria they actually have. What do I need to do? What's my GPA? All these things should be information that is available for the students, so they're able to understand what they need before they apply, instead of applying and waiting for long periods of time. So, yeah.
I'd like you to shift the mic to Kamo. Kamo, do you have any sort of response specifically to the same question in terms of how you would promote some sort of transparency as well as the efficient communication that's available, consultation that's available towards students when it comes to them raising issues like accommodation costs, tuition, and also financial exclusion?
Okay, so I would promote transparency by ensuring regular open forums where university finance and accommodation departments present clear breakdown of tuition, residence cost, and debt policy in accessible language. Student representatives should have a seat on decision-making committee related to fees and financial exclusion, with a mandate to report back to the student body. I'd also advocate for published annual cost guides, accessible online dashboards, and feedback mechanisms such as surveys so that students can raise concerns. Most importantly, consultation must be meaningful, not just informing students of decisions after they are made, but involving them in the process of addressing financial exclusion and building trust.
I see, Kaylee's nodding quite a bit. Kaylee, do you have any sort of response to this in terms of creating a transparent and efficient, consultation environment for students?
No, I think I agree with my colleague there. I think I would agree that promoting student forums. I don't think a lot of students know how these student forums work or know that they're actually going on. Because I know as a student myself, as a first year, when I heard this word, I was very confused. I thought this was just a back and forth between the SRC, but no, there's actually procedures and there's things in place for how these meetings run. So I would definitely implement more students forums and on specific topics, not general Q&As. I find that very useless as a student when we just say we're having a Q&A session. Let's get targeted responses. Okay, what are we doing about accommodation, like we've spoken about? What are we doing about bursaries, internships? Let's have targeted student forums where students can ask specific questions about specific topics, and we come with that specific information that they're looking for.
Princess, I want to raise a specific question with you. I think all across the panel, alongside your fellow candidates, you've spoken a lot about collaboration and the importance of collaboration in terms of addressing student issues like study finance, financial exclusion. How do you plan to, bridge the gap between yourself and the university in terms of addressing financial issues that students face on campus?
Thank you for the question. I think, as my colleagues mentioned, that communication should be kept transparent. I need to, as a study finance officer, I need to make sure that I do follow-ups on everything that is done. Also, the university should make sure that before registration, they break out all the costs to students so that the student could know what are they paying for. Yeah, so I believe that working together with other SRC members, we can do this.
Yeah. May you pass the mic over to Kaylee? I see Kaylee seems to have a response on the same issue. The whole collaboration that needs to take place between yourself, if you're elected into this portfolio, as well as the university in terms of addressing student concerns, specifically when it comes to finances. What do you plan to propose when it comes to that?
Well, I was just agreeing with my colleague there in terms of feedback. I think that's the most important thing, and why I was agreeing with the student forum's proposal. I think, as SRC candidates, we can't do anything without the students telling us exactly what they need. So feedback in that loop, I think, would benefit the process. Now, going back to what you said, sorry, can you just repeat the question?
In terms of the collaboration that needs to take place when it comes to study finance or the study finance portfolio, as well as the university, in terms of addressing concerns that students face on campus when it comes to finances, how do you plan to do that if elected into this portfolio?
Yes, so what I initially, when I was drafting what I want my campaign to be about, I actually was focusing on what happens after this as a student. We're talking about finances now, but our finance portfolio is not just limited to the financial struggles that students are dealing with now. How can we talk about bursaries, internships, vacation work, graduate programs? What comes after this? So I also wanted to focus my campaign on, okay, how can I make those internship opportunities and things like that available to students now? And that's what I was talking about earlier with the working directory. How can we put all of this information into one location where students can come and find this? And I would do that by collaborating with the university and also employers who are offering these internships, graduate programs, and things like that, because university doesn't end when we get our degree. We are preparing for our professional lives after this. So I think I would collaborate with those employers, with the university, and use my portfolio to help influence those decisions.
I'd like you to pass the mic to Kamakelo. Kamakelo, you've heard a range of solutions, including a worker directory as well as transparency. What are some of the solutions that you think should be proposed in terms of, enhancing the collaboration that would happen within student finance as well as the university?
I'd like to agree with my colleague right here with collaborating with companies and the university. What I'll also propose is to work with alumni for better opportunities so that we can help the students and achieve collaboration.
And closing us off, Luwatle, what are some of the solutions that you think ought to be proposed in terms of strengthening the collaboration that Study Finance should have when it comes to themselves as well as the university?
I think the Office of Study Finance is quite an important office, right? Because a lot of these things that are happening on campus, they affect, we are supposed to be the ones helping out, you know. You look at accommodation, you look at all of these things that are happening. All these things are affected in what we do, you know. So as Study Finance Officer, we cannot completely look at other issues as completely separate from what we do. If a student can't afford where they live, that's a financial issue, it's a study finance issue. If a student can't afford food, that is a financial issue, and that's an issue we're supposed to be looking at. Also, if historical debt prevents them from registering, there's also a financial issue that us as Study Finance, or at least the Study Finance Office, is supposed to look at. Now, when it comes to collaboration, I currently serve now as the treasurer for SASCO at UP, and what I've come to notice is that even when it comes to getting funding for us, it's difficult. We rely on partnerships. We rely on reaching out to other sponsors to at least come and help us with events and getting, you know, resources to give out to students. So collaboration is very important, and I think that is one thing that I will make sure to, you know, add on and to build on when I get into office.
And, you know, ending on that note, I'd like each of you to have an opportunity to kind of give an elevator pitch in terms of, you know, showcasing to the students why exactly they should vote for you. So in less than 30 seconds, Luwatle, you're going to begin as you'll just pass the mic onwards once you're done. Can you just tell the students why exactly they should vote for you, specifically within this portfolio of Study Finance?
Right. Good afternoon to all students. My name is Luwatle, and I think I'm currently running for the position of Study Finance. I think the reason why I want students to vote for me is because I believe that the Office of Study Finance is a very important office. You know, it helps with a lot that's happening on campus, and at least to students, it really does, you know, have a big helping hand in what we do on campus. I want to advocate for accommodations for students. We want to fight food insecurity. You know, students should be able to come to campus with full stomachs, because you can't be a student, a proper student, without food. You know, you can't be fully active in whatever's happening here if you're stressed about accommodation and all these other things that are happening. So going into office right now would be a very important thing that I will be able to use, at least that office, you know, in advocating for the problems of students who, like myself, face defunding, who, like myself, owe the institution at least thousands of rands, you know, and are still worried about how to go about that moving forward. So yeah.
And Kamkhelo, why should students vote for you for this portfolio of Study Finance?
Okay, I'm Kamkhelo Muthapo, and I believe the students should vote for me because I'll fight for immediate relief during NSFAS delay, a real support for missing middle students, and full transparency in fees.
Kaylee, why should students vote for you in this SRC election?
Yes, so my background is BCom in economics and taxation. So I think that plays directly into my strengths. I talk about finance, I understand how money works, and I understand how to make it better work. So I think I can use those strengths and my other previous leadership positions and the experience I've gained from that, especially being tax at tax and being class representative. So I'm on the ground with people who are going through these issues. I'm not distant from what's going on the ground. I'm not unaware. So I would be able to use my experience, use my knowledge to best suit and come up with solutions for students in those situations.
And finally, Princess, why should students vote for you in this upcoming SRC election?
Students should vote for me because I believe I'm the right candidate. I believe I'll be the voice of the voiceless, and education is a right, not a privilege. A student should not be stopped on going to school because they do not have funding, because they cannot afford to buy toiletries. These are some of the issues that we face when we come to university in February. I believe that I will advocate and keep transparency between me and NSFAS and the institution and any other bursaries that are available.
Thank you all for joining us for this SRC debate. A reminder of your candidates. Further is from myself is Luwatle. Next to Luwatle is Kamokhelo. Next to Kamokhelo is Kaylee. And next to Kaylee is Princess. And all of them are vying for your vote in this upcoming SRC election that is set to take place from the 19th of August. And they are all running for the position of Study Finance Officer. A reminder to check out all the other episodes, or rather debates, on the DSA's YouTube page. And keep your eyes peeled over the next couple of days, as all of these candidates are set to present their manifestos in the law building at the University of Pretoria.